Today, I will help you with the Mavic 2 Pro settings to get those best cinematic videos. But first, what is that? That was some of my best footage yet. I hope you enjoyed that. Hey guys, Felix here with Quadcopterguide, bringing you the best drone rumors, reviews, and tips. On this channel, I cover a lot of guides like this one today, so if you're new here, please consider subscribing. In this video, I'm going to cover cinematic. What does cinematic mean? What are we really trying to achieve? What does cinematic footage look like? I'm going to also go over H.264 style settings. That is the quickest way to get cinematic looking footage, but it's not the best. The best, of course, is using H.265 and D-Log M, so we're going to go into detail of that. And then finally, I'm going to go over some drone settings and general camera settings, which will help you get that ultimate cinematic footage. So be sure to stick around for that. All right, so what does cinematic footage really mean? What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to mimic or shoot like cinema cameras do. The image that those cameras produce are not over-sharpened in camera. They kind of provide a really bland image, so that way the editor or the person doing the post-production can have the most kind of flexibility to give it that look that they're going for. Luckily, we can do that with the Mavic 2 Pro as well. Cameras like the Red Weapon 8K offer 16.5 stops of dynamic range. So it's able to depict light and levels of light in 16.5 different steps. Well, you might say, great, 16.5 stops, that is fantastic. What does that really mean for me? Well, most estimate that the human eye actually offers around 10 to 14 stops of dynamic range in typical daylight conditions. And as a comparison, the Mavic 2 Pro is claimed by DJI to have 14 stops of dynamic range. Now, based on my research, that 14 stops is only achievable when shooting raw still images. For video shooting in H.265 and D-Log M, we can expect to get around 11.5 to 12 stops of dynamic range. Now, there's one area of settings on the Mavic 2 Pro that affect the cinematic look of our footage the most, and that is the style settings menu. First up is H.264. All right, H.264 for quicker post-production times and for a clip that looks good, just not as good as it could. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these settings that we're gonna go through look best to me based on my preference and on my Mavic 2 Pro. Now, the best settings that you'll end up with at the end might be just slight variations of these, and that's fine. It's all based on your preference and what looks good to you. All right, let's jump on the computer real quick and check out the best H.264 settings and how I came up with them. All right, here's our test scene. In terms of focus point, I chose these trees right here. And for the sharpness settings that we're going to go through at the beginning, I found one of the easiest places to see the difference in sharpness was on this tree bark here. Here we're looking at sharpness -3, here -2, and here -1. It's starting to look nice and crispy, but not too sharp. Now if we switch to sharpness 0, to me it's starting to look kind of over-sharpened. And here, +1, +2, and +3, and that just looks ridiculous. So my favorite is -1. Alright, so the next setting we can adjust in the style menu of the Mavic 2 Pro is contrast. And to look at contrast, I launched my video editor, which is Final Cut Pro, and on the left you see kind of a weird graph or chart. That is the Luma waveform. So essentially what that means is this image here, the dark areas, so all these kind of black shadows, those are depicted by these lines here. And then the bright sky and all this kind of blown out part, that's up here at 100. So anything over 100 is just white. There's no more detail left. And anything under 0 here, That's just black, there's no detail left in it as well. And the midtones are then above 0 and below 100. They don't have to be perfectly on this 50 line. In our case, they're around the 25. And that is due to our test scene just not being super contrasty. There's only very few kind of dark areas, and there's a lot of this kind of same colored, same brightness of brown tan in the logs. All right, so if we look at -3, you can see that the waveform is like this. Now when we go to -2, you can see that this range, this chunk of data or colors gets moved down lower. So as we're adding more contrast, we're separating the bright and dark parts of the image more. So here's -1, 0, +1, +2, and then +3. And you can tell that with +3, it's just everything's trying to get pushed to one extreme or the other, and it looks really bad. So let's take a look at more down here. So -2 is looking okay, but it's a little bit flatterish, on the flattish side. And then -1. Here we got -2 again, and here -1. 0 is starting to be just a little bit too much for me, so I'm going to choose -1 for contrast. The final style setting for H.264 is saturation. So let's take a look at that now. Here we've got saturation set to -3. Here it's at -2. Here saturation at -1. Here it is at 0. Here at +1 and +2. And then finally saturation +3, and now we're starting to get glowing and neon, and that looks kind of cheapish and amateurish, so we definitely don't want that. So let's go back down here. So -2 and -1. Of these two, I would pick -2. That gives us a nice starting point if we want to add colors manually with a color grade after the fact, or if we want to apply a LUT. So saturation, I'm going to pick -2. Up until a few months ago, I always caught myself shooting in H.264 because I was unsure of what settings to use for H.265 and D-Log M. It looked all flat, I didn't know what to do with it. Can you relate to that? Have you shot in H.265? I'd love to hear about your experience. Let me know below. Alright, it's time for H.265 and D-Log M. These are the settings that I used at the beginning of the video in that cinematic sequence. One of the reasons you want to use H.265 and D-Log M when you're going after that cinematic footage is it just records more detail than shooting in H.264. It's sort of similar to shooting JPEG versus RAW on still images. Now, it's not 100% the same because the Mavic 2 doesn't record RAW video, but the idea is similar. RAW records more information, so you have more flexibility after you've shot the image. Alright, so I'm not going to go through every single setting, but just my favorites. So for sharpness, that is +1. For contrast, -1. And saturation, I keep at 0. I found that these settings give me a nice base to start color correction and color grading. There are a couple more settings we need to look at when considering cinematic footage and the best cinematic settings. First, I'm going to cover more camera settings, and then look at some settings that are just for the drone itself. The best aperture to shoot at I found is f4. If you want to kind of find out the background of that and why f4 is the best, after this video you can check out my ND filter video linked up here. FOV or full field of view versus HQ or high quality mode. If you're going after that wide kind of shot like I did in the intro, then use full field of view. If you want a little bit more zoomed in image, then use HQ mode. For white balance, just pick sunny, cloudy, or enter a custom white balance. It doesn't really matter too much, but make sure you pick one. Don't leave it on auto. The worst is when you're going through filming and then mid-shot it changes the white balance on you. The histogram I leave on. It lets me see how the image is exposed with a quick glance. I recommend you do the same. And AFC I've turned off. Why and how to achieve the sharpest focus I cover in my sharpest settings video. Feel free to check that one out. I have zebras on. That's when you see the kind of black and white lines dancing on the image when something is overexposed. This lets you know that it's so bright that even shooting in D-Log M in post-production, you're not going to get any of the details back. So I have that on. The grid lines and center point help you frame your image, so I recommend you turn those on as well. So another big thing you can do to get cinematic looking footage is to adjust your gimbal settings. Maximum gimbal pitch speed, I choose a value that is no higher than 10. For certain type shots, when I want to be super slow and smooth, I set that to 4 to 5. And then for more general type flying, around 8 to 10. But I usually don't ever go over 10. So for gimbal pitch smoothness, I set it at around 20. If you find that that's smoothing it a little bit too much or too little, you can adjust it from there, but 20 is a good value to start with. Enabling the gimbal pitch limit to 30 degrees, that helps you capture big subjects like mountains. If the peaks are cut off when you're horizontal with the drone, you can enable that to move the camera up a couple degrees to include the tops of the mountains. I usually have that on. All right, so in terms of flight modes, I use tripod mode for the kind of really close quarter stuff, because that's when uneven or unsmooth movement is the most noticeable. So for that, I turn on tripod mode. And for other types of shots, I use cinematic mode. Now just be aware that your braking distance of your drone is extended by enabling cinematic mode. So if you're used to flying full speed towards an object and then letting go and braking in time, with cinematic mode, it'll take a little bit longer to brake. So just be aware of that. Which of those best cinematic settings will you try first? I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you'd like to learn more, hit that subscribe button. I really do appreciate it. Thanks, until next time.